Hello, it's Andrew Eborn again with another Lives on Lockdown, where we're going to be joined by Chantal Rickards. Welcome back, it's Andrew Eborn here with another Lives on Lockdown, and my very special guest is Chantal. Hello, are you there?
I'm here, still here.
One of the things I love about lockdown is we have people ringing on the doorbell, we have all the hamster wheels churning over time to make sure we get the internet connection. And the glorious thing, I'm right in the heart of London, right by, very close to Post Office Tower. And in spite of all of that, the hamsters are not working hard enough, are they? It's going to be good. Lovely for joining us again. Thank you for your patience. When you were here last time,
Pleasure.
we were talking about how this extraordinary crisis has given birth to some new heroes. We start to respect the NHS, and both your parents are in the NHS at the very, very beginning. We also started to look at not so much the celebrity side, but real local heroes, people like now Sir Thomas More, and hopefully he'll turn out better than the last Sir Thomas More. But all of that sort of stuff is brilliant, isn't it? And we love that. It's really
fantastic.
It's a new focus.
I think real life heroes are clearly better than any other hero. I mean, I was giving a lecture recently, just before I came back from America, and talking about the rise of real stories being played out in cinema. And if you look at the things that have been coming up and up and up in cinema recently, they're real life stories. And there is nothing better than a real life story, because actually you attach yourself to the story in a different way because you know it's real and it makes a difference. I mean, mostly people don't do a real life story and then don't tell you about it. They want you to know it's a real life story. So your engagement as a viewer is enhanced because you know it's for real and you appreciate the story so much more.
No, and that's absolutely right, isn't it? I think what's happened now, every day we're bombarded with statistics. And the sad thing is, with the lies, damn lies, or statistics, what happens is people forget there are people behind those statistics. So when you start to see the devastation and the real hurt there is you personify grief. It's rather like, you're right, the movie 1917, for example, is one person's tale about their war.
Indeed.
And then all of a sudden, you become part of it. It's not just this happened and we're so used to explosions and death and destruction. You start seeing the devastating effect on one person. You get to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also when you find out, in fact, at the end, that the director was related to that person, it becomes even more important and valuable and sticky.
Was that a spoiler? Have you just told us at the end? That's what happened. You're right.
I didn't tell you what happened at the end.
You see, that's all good. 1917, just 7:15 at night, I think, wasn't it? It's going to be good.
Exactly.
The other thing which is extraordinary as well is that you, through your journey, you went from, as you say, up north, you went down a bit to Dorset. You then got sent away to boarding school at quite a young age, actually, quite a tender age, 11. How did you find that experience, being sent away quite young?
Oh, I really liked it, actually. It wasn't quite St. Trinian's. The place was run by Catholic nuns. So it was fairly strict. But I loved being with people. I'm quite sociable, really. I'm a sort of social animal. And actually, I really enjoyed it. It was fun. I really enjoyed it until I was about 16. And then I felt quite stifled by it. So I got a little bit naughty. I think just before A-levels, in my Christmas term before A-levels, they asked me to leave school because I had disobeyed them on 3 occasions.
Well, what were the things? What did you do wrong?
Well, by that stage, I'd got my driving license. So I would take it upon myself to borrow my mother's car on Saturday and frequently drive over to the local boys' monastery called Downside.
Local boys' monastery, okay.
Yes, indeed. This was really naughty.
This isn't brilliant. You're writing the script, Chantal. This is fantastic. I love it. Go on then. You knock on the door.
I pack the car with girls and we would head off to Somerset for the day and have a jolly good time. There wasn't any drinking and driving, I have to say, but this was against the rules. And then I would hide the car in the school grounds and then drive it back to my mother's home the following day. And on the third occasion that the nuns found my mother's car in the school grounds, they then sent me a letter about a week later during the Christmas holidays saying, "We don't think you're really very focused on your A-levels. We'd rather you didn't come back." And I sent them a letter back saying, if anybody is going to blow their A-levels, it'll be me. And I will be back on January the 6th with my trunk. And I will spend the last 6 months at the school I have been at for the last 6.5 years. So with that, they let me through the front door. I marched back in on January the 6th with my trunk, and that was that.
And I love the fact that you're negotiating even at an early age. I think that's fantastic. And how did your parents respond to that? Did they get the letter, or you managed to get the letter first?
No, letter was sent to me, which actually was rather clever of Reverend Mother. And Reverend Mother and I were rather good friends. And I think she knew exactly what effect it would have on me. And it sort of worked rather well in the end. So, and she was right and I was wrong.
Did you discuss it with your parents though?
I don't even remember a conversation about it, to be honest. I'm not even sure I even shared it with them. I have no idea.
This is the moment. Absolutely. The family now knows it's out there.
The family now, exactly.
I love it. And so that was one occasion. You say there were 3 occasions. What were the other 2?
No, well, I brought the car back 3 times.
Oh, it was. It was the same thing with yourself. Glorious. I love it. But I also love the fact that you're there and you're negotiating with the Mother Superior. I think that works really well. It's gonna be good. So you also, did you take part in artistic things? You're doing school plays. I think you're an actress at school.
I was an actress at school, an actor. I still don't know whether you say actor or actress, and that's after 5 years in Hollywood. I did all that stuff. I did my London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art exams, and I got gold medals, and I did all of that stuff. So at one stage, I was either going to be an actress or a gynecologist. I was going to go one way or the other. It was a strange choice. Yes, exactly. And neither came off. And I suppose it didn't really come off because when I polled up at UCL, the first club I went to, society I went to, was the Drama Society.
Right.
And I went in one evening when there was a, literally first week of the first term. And they were doing auditions. And it was a proper stage. It was a proper theatre. It's the theatre that's on Gower Street in London, which is still there. And it was our central collegiate building. But to me, it was a big, scary, grown-up theatre with proper lights. And I'd never been onto the stage of a theatre before. And I looked at all these other students who were auditioning, and I thought, crikey, they are really good. And I had no idea of actually whether I was any good or not. And I turned on my heels and left. I just thought, I am not good enough to join the Drama Society.
You bottled out?
I bottled out. I was completely pathetic. Yep, pathetic. But anyway, it is what it is.
And why do you think, having been so confident and negotiating with the Mother Superior just a few months beforehand, why did you bottled out?
Don't know. Confidence comes in waves. One doesn't always feel confident. And I think, being that, what I felt like a small scared person who'd arrived as, the country mouse to town mouse, and suddenly turned up, and I felt all of those sort of country years and country boarding school, and suddenly I was in the big city, and I probably wasn't as confident then as I became later. But confidence is a mercurial thing, and it comes and goes in waves. And I definitely suffer from imposter syndromes all those decades later. And I think a lot of people do.
Oh, no, absolutely. And you can tell, I also went to boarding school, and you could tell the people who didn't go to boarding school. And I went up to Durham, and you could tell the people who were away from home for the first time. And there were lots of these 18, 19-year-olds, a lot of whom were sort of missing home. And it was okay, it's okay to admit that. But you had to have that sort of bravado about it. So I totally get it. And I think a lot of people think about, look, it's the Emperor's New Clothes. One day they're going to see me and understand that this is all just an act, And I found that as a barrister as well, because when you first start, you're representing people who could be one generation ahead of you. And you can disguise it a bit. You've got this wonderful wig on and Batman gown, and you sort of look the part, but you think they're going to call you out one day, So I do get that sort of Emperor's New Clothes bit, which is interesting. But in your final year, you did 4 years, didn't you, doing French at UCL?
4 years. So I did my third year in France, in a town called Alençon in Normandy. And for anybody who has ever driven south from the north coast of France, Alençon is the town that you go through just before Le Mans. So it's on the way south. It's a bit of a sleepy town. It was rather like Blandford Forum, which was my local Dorset town when I was growing up. And it was pretty sleepy, but it was fun. You know, I enjoyed it. The teaching I found quite difficult. One could elect either go to university for a year in France or indeed to teach. And I was an assistante anglaise, and I taught in two schools. I taught in one which was in the poor side of town, where my classes were obligatory, and I also taught in the middle class side of town, in another school, where my classes were voluntary. And the difference between the two classes was enormous. The kids, the middle class kids who were already pretty bright and pretty well educated and wanted to learn, were a joy to teach. And the kids from the tough side of town gave me a very, very hard time. And I think that was when I realized that I couldn't really be a teacher, because I found that so frustrating. And clearly they needed my help so much more than the educated middle class kids really needed, because these people were much further down the pole. But I found it terribly frustrating that I couldn't help them in the same way. And I thought, I'm probably not teacher material. So I never really thought about pursuing a career in teaching.
And you're right. And I think the more you see this, the more you can respect teachers and so on and so forth, those who have those professions, because teaching people who want to learn is wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. At the same time, you didn't want your Robin Williams moment then. You didn't want to try and convert these tough kids into learning.
I did when I was there, but actually I don't think I succeeded very well. I just about kept control for the hour that I was teaching them. But I was babysitting them, to be honest. They really didn't want to learn. I ended up playing hangman in English for most of the hour, just to keep them, occupied and interested.
Right.
It was tough, actually. I suppose in terms of challenges that I've had, trying to teach 12-year-old French kids how to speak English was tougher than I thought it was going to be.
And the trouble is, when you lose, if you don't have the respect of the people there, it's a really difficult environment, because they don't care. They've got nothing to lose. In the same way as you had nothing to lose when you went back to the Mother Superior. You'd already been booted out. You can only go up. You're going to go back in again. If the kids are there and being forced to go there, they get expelled. Yeah. They're happy to be expelled, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a conundrum. It's clearly a conundrum. But I mean, in those days, a lot of French didn't speak English. I mean, right. Now it's much more common for the French to speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly when I went to France, then people, even the ones who did speak English, wouldn't really try and help you out. I mean, there was a little bit of, we don't like the English that much. But now, of course, English is much more commonly spoken in France. So there's no friction in the way that there used to be.
So you went from saying, okay, I'm not going to be a teacher. You decided, however, that I'd like a life in the media. When did that moment happen?
Immediately. And I applied for the BBC training course, or I investigated applying for the BBC training course.
Yes.
And realised that actually there was no way I was going to get through to that, because it was mainly Oxbridge people in those days. And I just didn't think I had anything to offer. I hadn't pursued my drama, and French didn't really relate to anything that the BBC might have needed me for. So actually I scuttled away and thought, I'm going to have to be slightly more clever about this, because I realized I wanted a career in television. I was crazy about telly. I'd always been crazy about telly. I was a big TV watcher as a child. My mother hated that in me. She wanted me to read more. I was a reader too, but actually I loved television more than I should have done.
What programs would you watch as a child?
Oh, well, I think I can remember coming back after getting home on the school bus when I was, 11, before I went away to boarding school, and rushing in the house and turning on Crossroads. I loved Crossroads. But as an 11-year-old, I probably shouldn't have been sitting there watching afternoon soap operas, but absolutely loved it. I also loved all the American stuff, and clearly still do. The Kojaks and the great American crime stuff that they were producing. American comedy I loved. So I sort of knew I wanted to go into TV. And I thought, okay, let's be clever about this, find a different path, and apply then for a job in television once you've got something to offer. So I thought, well, advertising might get me there, because advertising is sort of part of television. And I was thinking there might be a way that I can, I can just sort of work my way through. So in fact, I signed up for with recruitment a company called Graduate Appointments or something like that. Walked in and I said, here I am, I'm a graduate. I think I want to get into television, but I think I can probably do that by going via advertising. And I was working within 10 days for a company called Haymarket Publishing, which at that stage was owned by Sir Michael Heseltine, who I think, is he Lord Heseltine now? I'm sure he is. He was Sir Michael
Tarzan, as he then was, yes.
Tarzan, indeed. And I sold advertising space for 6 months, I think, for Marketing magazine. So actually, I got to understand the marketing industry quite early. I didn't come from a family that knew about business. And so I started learning about how business worked and how things fitted together, which was interesting.
It has to be one of the best jobs to start with, because that has to be tough, because you have your sales targets, probably about 18 a day or whatever it is. You've got to get to the people who make the decisions. If you don't get to the people who make the decisions, it's irrelevant. And you're judged on results. That's going to be a great grounding. How did you find it?
Really tough. Selling, I think, is incredibly hard. You're right, that you had to make what they called 18 effective telephone calls a day, i.e. you had to talk to the decision maker 18 times a day, which is really difficult. But you had to be quite disciplined about it. You had to write really good notes. You had to have really good follow-up. You had to have great support. And it was a very good training scheme, actually. I'm glad I did it. In many ways, I'm glad I did it. But at the end of 6 months, I thought, well, selling isn't really for me. And I want to keep going on this path. And I don't think that going through selling is going to help. So in fact, I disappeared off to America. My sister had just moved to America at that stage. And I had a little bit of a hankering that I might want to work in the States. So I went and joined her in New York for 4 months, and then came back from there and rejoined Haymarket Publishing. But I went into their marketing and promotions team. So I then started promoting the magazines, running their awards ceremonies, doing their own publicity and marketing, and learning how to do that on behalf of a media company. And I really enjoyed all the event management. We used to run the big advertising awards in the country, the Campaign Press Awards and the Campaign Marketing Awards. And I was entirely responsible for those big events, big 1,000-seater dinners at the Grosvenor House Hotel. And so effectively I got into a production role of producing major events. And that was, I knew then that I was sort of getting closer and closer to television production, because these were in effect big media productions. They just weren't televised.
They're huge, and you had to herd so many cats to bring it all together, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, they were tough, and I can remember all-nighters, sitting in the ballroom at the Grosvenor House, doing the get-in 24 hours before the actual show, and we would literally not sleep for probably 30 hours, making sure that the thing would happen. And it was incredibly good training, actually. And then from there, I actually joined the production company that used to make these events. One of their clients was Channel 4. Channel 4 was still doing transmitter launches. I mean, can you imagine? It seems like a long time ago now. And so I was then responsible for doing a lot of the Channel 4 events. And that got me again closer to television. Channel 4 became a client. And I was then sitting on the Channel 4 marketing committee. And I was approached by the PR, one of the external PR teams, company called Cowan Bellew, who said, would you like to come and do showbiz PR for us? We do film and television PR. And I thought, okay, this is adding to this weird little career that I was trying to create. This is adding another bolt onto what I've already got. So for 18 months, I joined a fantastic human being called Theo Cowan.
Yeah, Theo Cowan's a legend in the business.
Yeah.
I bet he's the sort of guy who will have these fantastic stories about how you put everything in perspective.
Completely and utterly. Perspective was his thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can remember once, I mean, he looked after Michael Caine and Jeremy Irons and Dirk Bogarde and fabulous people. So I joined this really exciting team. But I can remember once, and in fact, I repeated this story when I went back to UCL a couple of years ago to do what the Americans call the commencement address, but for the people who've just got their finals, done their finals. And so I told this story at UCL, which very briefly, it's about perspective, which is, perspective is everything. That when you've got a problem, it clouds absolutely everything in your world. You can't see anything at all. And you just concentrate on that, on nothing else. But if you move your perspective, you've still got the same problem. And you move the problem physically away from you, you can then see everything else that is around you. You can then take other opinions from people. You can then take other thought processes in. And all you've actually done is shift your perspective. The problem hasn't changed. The size of the problem hasn't changed, but your perspective on it has changed. And actually, it was an incredibly good and powerful thing to impart to somebody like me at a fairly young age. And so after 18 months, I realized that by that stage, I'd got a very good address book. I'd been promoting shows on Channel 4 from, Countdown to The Gong Show to Hill Street Blues, all sorts of great things. A Woman of Substance. I worked on the launch of Woman of Substance, which I think to this day is Channel 4's most watched program ever. So I had a great time there, but then suddenly there was that light bulb thing, and I was down at the ACTT, the union, on a Friday morning, where they would always pin the television union, for those that don't know telly. They would pin jobs up on the jobs board on a Friday morning, and I would scuttle off down there just to see if there were any jobs that I could apply for in telly. And then one day, there was a job for an unnamed television program that was just about to go to air. And it was about celebrities' homes. And I thought, I wonder what that is. It sounds rather interesting. And they were just, in fact, about to make the second series, but the first series hadn't aired at that stage. So I didn't know anything about it, couldn't really find out anything about it. And I thought, well, hang on a second. This is something I think I could be really good at and I could be really interested in. So I phoned up Yorkshire Television, who were advertising a 9-month contract. And I said, I'm a journalist in London. And they said, oh, are you? That's lovely. Clearly I wasn't. And I said, here, you've got this new show coming out on ITV. Could you send me a screener? I'd like to have a look at it because I'd like to write about it for my free sheet in London. And they said, oh, we haven't got screeners. And I thought, damn, I sort of want to know a bit more about this. And by that stage, I'd applied for the job. I'd got an interview, and it was absolutely imperative that I was, I had as much information to my hands as I possibly could. But the girl on the phone in the press office at ITV said, but we have got a screening in London tomorrow if you'd like to go along to it. All the showbiz journalists will be there. And of course, I knew every showbiz journalist in town. And I thought, okay, well, this could be tricky because they'll wonder what the hell I'm doing there if I turn up. I thought, no, I've got to get in to see this half-hour show somehow. So I thought if I time it right, I can sneak in through the back of the Yorkshire Television screening room whilst it's dark when the opening titles are rolling. And then as the credits roll at the end, I'll sneak out of the back. And so none of the other journalists will ever know I've been there because I knew it would get straight back to Theo Cowan that I had snuck into somebody else's screening. And that's exactly what I did. So I snuck in, I saw the program, snuck out again. 48 hours later, I had my interview, didn't mention that I had seen the program, came up with lots of ideas and said, well, if it had been me, I might have done it this way and I might have done it that way. And I might have had this type of guest and that type of guest. And clearly they thought I was omniscient because they knew I hadn't seen the show, or they thought they knew I hadn't seen the show. And 48 hours later, I was offered the job. And in fact, I didn't tell my boss at Yorkshire Television for 6 months that I had been slightly sneaky about getting some insider information that had obviously helped me during the interview process.
Oh, absolutely.
And that that started my telly career.
And a phenomenal way to do it, and a great lesson to be learned there. What were the things you suggested they should change when you looked at it? Do you remember?
Well, we did quite a lot more. I wanted to take it international, and eventually I worked my way from researcher to associate producer to producer. I then trained as a single camera director, eventually became the executive producer and passed on the producing responsibilities to other people. I always wanted to take it international. I always thought it had enormous possibility to be a show that could be replicated around the world, but also that it could include European and American stars. And so when I became the producer, that was the first thing I did, really, was to make it international in that way. And I also loved the way that I was able to juxtapose very different people in each program and then match the panelists to the show itself, so that there was always a panelist who could probably work it out. And that was massively important. It might sound like a very simple show. It was actually much more complicated than it seems to get the right people on each particular show so that it just worked. And for those that don't know, it was a very simple guessing game about trying to work out who lived in a home from a range of celebrities, and other celebrities had to guess. It is still on air on ITV Saturday night, 9:20. Please watch.
Absolutely.
And we're a Fremantle who look after the project, and I'm still the format consultant on it. We are looking at other international opportunities at the moment.
And Keith Lemon sort of reinvented it to a new audience, hasn't he?
He did. So that was one thing I was still closely involved with it all the way through. And then ITV were keen on taking the show back from BBC, where it had been a daytime property. So it had gone from ITV primetime, where it used to get a 63% share on a Friday night. Can you imagine? Yeah. Extraordinary. And then it went to Sky, then it went to the BBC, and it was, for a long time, it was a BBC daytime show. And then ITV decided they wanted to bring it back to primetime, but they wanted to completely re-energize it, and they wanted to go for a younger audience. And where it had ended up on BBC daytime, it was much more for an older audience, which is the daytime audience. And so ITV took it back, but they needed a younger host. And actually, it was a little bit difficult to say to, the illustrious David Frost, David, they don't really want you in the main chair any longer. And that was a difficult conversation to be had. But David was one of the owners of Through the Keyhole, along with Lloyd Grossman and Kevin Sim. Yeah. Well, Paradigm was the production company. It had been devised by Kevin Sim, who's a documentary maker. But he had given a third each to Lloyd Grossman and David Frost. Right. And Paradigm, after ITV had actually physically produced the program. But it's now produced by Fremantle.
Right. And Sir David, phenomenal guy. I was very lucky on this Al Jazeera show. He interviewed me about copyright and Penn and Teller and copyrighted magic tricks. He's a real character, was a real character. Tell me about your relationship with him.
He was brilliant. He was an amazing human being. He taught me something very early on, which is don't get your research notes wrong. And I hung him out to dry in a way that I hadn't even thought was going to happen. And I had done some notes on a famous, oh my God, Freddie Truman, that's who it was, famous Yorkshire cricketer who was on Through the Keyhole. And I had said Freddie had worked down the pits. He had worked for the colliery board, but my phrase was down the pits. So when David asked him in the interview, and I used to prepare David's interviews, when David said something to him about, well, Fred used to work down the pits, he said, no, I didn't. And there's a big difference in the colliery world between the above ground people and the below ground people.
Absolutely.
And I hadn't quite understood that there was a nuance and I hadn't understood that clarity was everything. And so he immediately said to David, no, it didn't work down pit, David. And so suddenly I thought, oh my God, the world is falling in on me. And David came up to me afterwards and said, that wasn't good enough. get your research notes right. I don't want to be hung out to dry again like that. And he was absolutely right. I hadn't been careful enough. I mean, in those days, there wasn't even internet, for God's sake. I was just working on, newspaper cuttings, and not many of those. So it was a mistake I tried not to make again in terms of getting the detail right. But David was fabulous. I always enjoyed his company. He was always on good form. He had a sparkling personality. There wasn't anybody he didn't know. He was the greatest raconteur in the world. What's not to like? He was charming, and he was an icon. Yeah. And working with icons is a great privilege.
And quite incredible. Can you let me into one secret there? One secret about Through the Keyhole. You may not want to answer, but one secret. It is so many celebrities out there, so many different houses, so many possibilities. You have to give them a little bit of an extra clue behind the scenes, don't you?
Never. Absolutely. It would ruin the show, because most of the celebrities who are trying to guess aren't actors. You can't expect them to act. If you tell them, they will behave in a most peculiar way. And actually the fun is when they get it wrong. It's much, much funnier when they make mistakes. And also, if they had known who they were just about to disparage or take the mickey out of, they would have been far more circumspect about what they said. And actually the fun was when they were basically let off the leash, because they had no idea who was round the back of the set. So we never, ever, ever, ever gave the game away. It would be entirely pointless. And when we've sold it to other countries, we have insisted that they follow the rules in the same way.
Very good. So in the Bible, compulsive television, fantastic to see. So what made you decide to go from such a successful TV show? Were you headhunted? How did you decide on the next step?
No, well, when I was at Yorkshire, I was working on lots of other TV shows at the same time. So I was working on the Parkinson show, because clearly Through the Keyhole wasn't in production all year. So I worked on the Parkinson show. I worked on Countdown, which, I ended up as series producer on Countdown. We did the James Whale radio show, which was a, fantastic late night entertainment show that really started the great big late night entertainment thing on ITV, and was great fun to work on. Anarchic television in the extreme, but really, really good fun. And I worked on Winner Takes All. I did a little bit of holiday work, call it holiday work, on Masterchef. So I actually did the first series of Masterchef, but I did it in my holiday time, because Lloyd Grossman had gone on to Masterchef and was doing it for the BBC, but they were having trouble getting celebrities for the very first series. And because it was a daytime show on a Sunday, and high-profile people didn't do things like a daytime show on a Sunday for the BBC. I mean, they didn't exist, programs like that. It was the Antiques Roadshow and a couple of black and white movies. And so Lloyd phoned me and said, look, we're having problems getting big celebrities to agree to be the celebrity on the show, because they always had one celebrity guest. So I basically moonlighted, which was a little bit naughty of me, to sign up celebrity guests. And the first person I signed up was Michael Caine, because of course I had known Michael and his management team from my days with Cowan Bellew when I was in PR. And I said, look, Michael, you've got a restaurant. This is good to establish your food credentials as well. Come and do this daytime show on a Sunday. It's called Masterchef, but it's going to be great. I think the BBC are really going to, put stuff behind it. And, we might even be able to get front page of the Radio Times out of this if we play our cards right. So I sort of sold it to him. And then he said yes, because clearly he could see it was a good idea and it was going to help promote his restaurant in London and his food credibility. And once we got Caine, then everybody else just said, oh, well, if you've got Michael Caine on the show, of course we want to be on it. And of course, MasterChef became a thing. It became absolutely essential.
Revolutionary. 20 years ahead of its time. It was fantastic. Yeah. And you discovered a lot of new talent as well, didn't you?
I did. Well, later on, after I left Yorkshire Telly, I worked on City Hospital for BBC One, which I loved. I did This Morning for ITV. But I ended up actually running the Food Network for Carlton. and which was great fun. And we had an enormous amounts of fun finding new talent. So I gave John Torode his very first series. I gave Paul Hollywood his very first series. Discovered James Martin. He actually did a series on Sky for Friends, but I had discovered him on a Through the Keyhole filming trip, working at Hotel du Vin in Winchester. And didn't know who he was, never heard of him, but Lloyd Grossman and I were having dinner in Hotel du Vin. And this gorgeous young chef bounced out of the kitchen at the end of dinner with a fabulous bottle of red wine and 3 enormous balloon wine glasses, and said, would you mind if I joined you? And clearly he wanted to talk to Lloyd. He didn't want to talk to me because, you know, Lloyd was incredibly well known at that stage. And we said, yeah, fine. And it was a beautiful bottle of red wine. So at the end of that bottle of red wine, clearly I was, you know, sort of eyeing this guy up thinking, he's fantastic. He was 24. He wore the bandana. He had the long hair. He was from Yorkshire. Everything just worked. And I phoned up a friend at Sky, Trish Kinane, who I mentioned earlier, who's now head of entertainment at Fremantle. And I said, Trish, I know you're just about to do a live daily show for Sky, but I found the chef that you need on that show. And 3 weeks later, James Martin was given his first TV show. So that's how that happened.
So, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, are those the bits that you like to find and nurture?
Yeah. Love that. I love it. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but actually I love trying to encourage others and to give something back and to bring on careers. It's the thing I've probably got most out of is looking after my staff and bringing up their careers, but also the other people around me, the talent that I've worked with, and hopefully giving something to them that means that, you know, their next adventure is brighter and better and bolder.
And what's extraordinary as well, Chantal, is an incredible work ethic. And when you have your son at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I think you were supposed to do an interview, weren't you?
That was true, actually. That is a funny story. I didn't know you knew that story. And I sort of tell it against myself normally. But indeed, it was the week that Theo was born. My son is called Theo, my eldest. And the week that he was born was the week that Through the Keyhole was going to air. And I had 3 radio interviews that I needed to do. No, it was the week after, actually, it was going to air. Anyway, I had to do 3 radio interviews that the press office had booked me into. 9 o'clock, 9:10, 9:20 on a Thursday morning. And of course, I knew the day before that I was in labour. And I thought, well, I'm not going to phone the press office and go, I'm sorry, I'm in labour. You know, it's a sort of slightly stupid thing to say. So I thought, okay, well, let's just see what happens. Anyway, I was determined to do these 3 interviews. So Theo was born at 3 o'clock in the morning at Queen Charlotte's Hospital in West London. And at 9 o'clock, I walked down to the end of the corridor with my bag of 50p's because there were no things like mobile phones in those days. And I had gone to the NatWest Bank the day before to get a bag of 50p's, knowing that I might have to use a public telephone. And I did the 3 radio interviews, pressing in the 50p's as I went. And then the press officer of Yorkshire Telly phoned all these 3 journalists a few hours later and said, so sorry that Chantal couldn't do her radio interview this morning. She had a baby at 3 o'clock. And they said, she didn't mention that when she called. So I had done the interviews and all was well. And, it was a thing. It was the only thing that I felt I was in control of, having been a mother for 6 hours, because you don't really feel in control of anything when you've just had your first child. So, yeah, that was the first day of my son's life.
Talk about a work ethic. I mean, it is your best production ever, and you're still doing the other ones.
Best ever. Best ever, yeah.
So after the Food Network, I mean, you worked there, you revolutionized television, you introduced lots of new people. What happened next?
So Food Network came and went. Carlton decided to pull out of their digital channels, which was a pity. Granada used to have a whole load of channels, and Carlton had another whole load of channels. And basically at the same time, they all pulled out. Also, the channel that I was running, the Food Network, was a joint venture with Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's also decided to pull their money out. So the channels, all of those channels came to an end, which was a pity because they were way ahead of their time. And then I joined the BBC, BBC Television, and I went to work for UKTV looking after the commissioning of all of their lifestyle programming. So it was mostly makeover shows, holiday shows, travel shows, fashion, food, really, really nice programming actually. And I exec produced about 16 series a year
And
for the
so many
BBC,
people,
all on UKTV.
sure, so many people would come up with formats on all the things that you mentioned. You go to any of these
Yeah.
markets, they've all got them. What would make you think this particular format's a winner?
Oh, that's interesting. Novelty is clearly something that one looks for, first of all. The production company, I always valued the proposals more highly from companies I knew best and trusted. I like trying new presenters. I thought that was always an interesting thing to do because it challenged you all the time and it challenged the audience. And if you could get the audience to take on a new presenter, that was a really good thing to do, actually. And I liked the way that people gave me ideas that challenged how things had been done before. I mean, television was changing so rapidly in terms of how you shot things and the speed at which you could shoot things and the speed at which you could edit. So each time somebody gave me something new that was allowing me to use different ways of making programs, that was also really good fun. Really good fun.
And you say you're trying to bring the new, it's that new quirky things like that. Talk to me about the new presenters then. What would you look for in somebody and how would you effectively create somebody? You said famous story about James Martin coming with his glorious bottle of wine and I can see him doing it and these three glasses. And you said, that's the guy, because you're permanently casting then, aren't you? You're always looking around saying, this person would be great here. Let's challenge this. I'm not quite sure this will shock people, but at least there's an element there. What did you look for and how did you find new people on that basis?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Villandry, which is a restaurant in
I know
Great
it very
Titchfield.
well. I know it well.
Not Great Titchfield. I can't remember which one
Yes,
it is.
it's
Great
just
Portland Street.
Great Portland Street, yeah.
With lots of different presenters coming, and I would buy them a cup of coffee, and we'd sit and chat. And basically, that was the interview process: was affability. Because if that affability was instantaneous, and the chat was great, and their thought processes were quick and they had interesting ideas, then generally they would then get another cup of coffee. I would buy them a second cup of coffee.
Maybe with a croissant as well for laundry. It's
Exactly. So yeah, affability and integrity, that's the other thing. And when people are faking it, you can spot it at a million miles in a fog. It's just, I hate insincerity on screen. It's too easily recognized and the audience don't buy into it. So charm, affability, honesty, integrity, stuff that you just like in human beings, frankly.
Sincerity, if you can fake that, you can fake anything. I think that's what Paul Martel said, didn't he?
Indeed.
They're all glorious. So you then went from there, the money from UKTV. You enjoyed your time there. You then went into the commercial side of it. A bit.
I did. So in fact, when I'd been at UKTV, I'd been working quite closely with brands because brands were wanting to fund TV programming in a more substantial way than just sponsorship. Sponsorship is brilliant, but it's a bit of a sort of blunt weapon. Whereas advertiser-funded program, where this brand actually is embedded into the TV show, was becoming more sophisticated and more interesting. So UKTV, because it was the commercial arm of the BBC, was allowed to take sponsors directly into television programs. So I had started doing that at UKTV. And then, in fact, I got headhunted by WPP, which is the world's largest advertising group, as some people will know. And they were trying to create content departments so that they could satisfy the demand from the big brands who wanted to explore this new territory of putting money directly into content production. So I went to WPP, to an agency called MEC, which is now called Wavemaker. For 7 years, I was head of branded content and programming there. Made programs for Channel 4, like the Channel 4 Book Club, which was sponsored by Specsavers. Made programs for Channel 5, food programming for Channel 5, sponsored by Spa. Made children's programming for ITV's, funded by Morrison's. put Usain Bolt into a league of their own on behalf of Visa, because he was their big brand ambassador. So we created a sprint round in a league of their own. It was really interesting, actually. It was also difficult because brands wanted more and more control, and clearly they're not allowed to control. And I had to sit in that very sort of weird space between the brand and the broadcaster. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about, indeed, more about the commercial world and how the finances of content were challenging and could be made better by brands, could be enhanced by what brands had to bring. And it was really good. I did a lot of traveling. I worked on a lot of international projects, worked a lot in America, did a lot of lecturing for them as well. So sort of buzzed around the world and gave talks in Singapore and Sydney and Moscow and Dubai and Egypt, and it was fun. It was good. It was a good time.
And as you say, it's a different way. I mean, Japan has had it for a long time with big agencies like Dentsu. I mean, WPP at that stage had, what, 40% of the market, I imagine?
Exactly, 40%. Yeah.
Yeah, huge in the advertising world. But also, I mean, you at that stage, then you trained poacher turned gamekeeper turned poacher. I mean, you looked at it from every side. Did that help your negotiations?
Ooh, probably, because I knew everybody's angle and I knew what they were all trying to get out of it. So I think it's a good question. I think it probably did actually help in terms of allowing me to try and be fair and to try and find a resolution relatively quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what Thea was sort of saying in terms of understanding not about things in perspective, but also perception.
Yeah.
And so often perception and reality are not necessarily aligned. But if you understand where the other person's coming from, your ability to negotiate with that person is greatly enhanced, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It just gives you so much more in your arsenal. So yeah, it's sort of interesting that all the weird bits of my career, because it is so non-traditional in its shape, has allowed me actually to see lots of different things and bring all of that learning to everything that I do, which has been useful, really. I mean, I'm a magpie. I just adopt bits of things from all over the place and then use it all to create something.
Yeah, but it's really important skills, because it's not just from a career point of view, but also on a personal basis. When you're handling family members, you might have conflicts or whatever it is, because every family has conflicts, whether it's organizing events or functions or any of those sort of stuff. Understanding the other person's position and putting yourself in their shoes is a great advantage. So having done that from a career point of view, it must have helped your personal life as well, didn't it?
Crikey. No idea is the simple answer to that. I don't know. Am I a good negotiator? Not when it comes to my children, my God.
Nobody. I spent my life negotiating. You could never negotiate with children. They win every time. It's a tricky one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I can't get anything past my kids, sadly.
It is interesting. But from you then, having worked successfully there, fantastic place, you've got the money. It's always good to represent the people who write the checks rather than those who rather than those who receive them. It tends to be a better journey. You then decided, or tell me how the BAFTA thing came about.
Okay, so this is another sort of slightly weird story about how things are strange and mercurial, and my life takes odd U-turns or right angle turns or just odd turns along the way. I was out in Los Angeles seeing a couple of girlfriends, both of whom I had worked with in British television. And we were sitting around a pool in Palm Springs. And one of them mentioned that there was a job at BAFTA in Hollywood. And I went, BAFTA's in Hollywood? Had no idea.
Which part of British do you not understand? Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just thought, what the hell's BAFTA doing in Hollywood? I sort of just didn't get it. And then the other one said, yeah, they want somebody out here to run the charity. And I went, BAFTA's a charity? I had no idea BAFTA was a charity. Oh, this is just weird and intriguing. And then the other one said, oh yeah, you know, you'd be rather good at that because they're looking for somebody who understands about sponsorship, because most of their money comes in through sponsorship, and they want somebody who's got a bit of a name in England or Great Britain, who's sort of established themselves, and they don't just want a functionary. They want somebody who's established and understands the non-profit sector. And I thought, well, I definitely don't understand the non-profit sector, but I certainly did understand celebrities. I had worked with some amazing people, and you've mentioned everybody from sort of Donald Trump to David Frost. Anyway, one conversation led to another, and I wasn't looking to leave the UK. I wasn't looking for a new job. I was actually very happy at WPP. And then one of the girls said, no, you should look at this. You'd be interesting. And I said, look, it's not my thing at all. Anyway, one margarita led to another, which probably led to a third or fourth. And somehow, it wasn't me, my CV was sent to the headhunter, who then started, 3 days later, I was back in the UK. And he then started phoning me saying, I hear you want a job in Hollywood and you've applied, you want to apply for this job with BAFTA. I went, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm not looking for a job in Hollywood. I don't know anything about the non-profit sector. I've never run a membership organization. Thank you, but no thank you. And this was a margarita too far. And he said, no, I think you'd be rather good at this. And, you've got a really interesting career. Clearly, you're sort of known in the UK, and you've worked with lots of famous people, and you've sort of, you've trodden some tricky waters. And I went, it's really not for me. Anyway, he was very, very forceful, this guy. Lovely chap. And literally 6 weeks later, he phoned me up and he said, look, I want to put your name forward. And I said, look, honestly, put my name forward if you want, and come back and tell me if the board are interested, because I'm not going through a whole process here, because I really wasn't convinced that I was the right person for the job. I didn't want to be rude to the guy. And I said, if the board genuinely think they're interested in me, come back and let me know. So within a week, he'd come back and he said, look, they've had a look at your CV and they're really interested. They would like to talk to you. So I then, for the first time ever in my life, because it was a job that I didn't need and I wasn't looking for and didn't particularly want, I said, look, I will come to LA for one day. I will give you 1 hour of my time. I will do a presentation. And then I will fly back to London. And those are my terms. But I have to be in the last 2 people that you're seeing. I'm not going to go through anything. You fast track me to the end of the process, and I'll come for a day, and I'll give you the hour, and I'll go home.
Brilliant.
And I did that. I went for the day. I turned up to the most horrible office on the planet. BAFTA's office was just like a rat-infested pit. It was horrible. I had, when I eventually worked there, clearly for 5 years, I moved us out of that office very quickly. Right. Turned up, did the interview, did a half-hour presentation, 30 minutes of questions. I was running the clock in my head as I went along. I could do that stuff. If you've been in telly, you know exactly where the clock is at any stage, and got to the end. There were some wonderful questions from wonderful people. It was the entire board. It was 18 of them. I mean,
what was the best question? What was the best question you were asked?
Well, I think the best question I asked, was probably the most inappropriate question, was, what are your personal circumstances?
Oh no, are they allowed to ask that?
Absolutely not. But the gentleman asking was an 83-year-old who was on the board at BAFTA and clearly didn't really know what the rules and regs were about asking people about their personal circumstances. So, and I think I answered that safely enough. And I just went, great question.
Great question.
Great question.
Talk to my lawyer.
So anyway, as we're now we've got to the final furlong, as it were. By the time I got back to LAX, 2 hours later, I had a text message, and I knew that I'd got the job. So landed in London the following morning thinking, bloody hell, I better talk to my kids about this. And that was a fairly interesting conversation. And I said, you know, one son at that stage was only 6 months away from his A-levels. And we did talk about all going as a family. The other son was at Exeter University by that stage. We talked about all going. And then the boys said, look, Mum, you go and have a couple of crazy gap years and come back when you've got it out of your system. And that was how I ended up being the chief exec of BAFTA in Hollywood. Which, as I think you know, Andrew, is completely separate to BAFTA in London. It doesn't answer to BAFTA in London, or it didn't then. It was a completely self-supporting unit. It had to create its own revenues. It had its own governance. It had its own board of directors. So I was effectively running the business for BAFTA Los Angeles. I was employed by BAFTA Los Angeles, not by BAFTA London. BAFTA London and LA are now coming together much more closely.
And you had some fantastic events as well, and fundraisers like the celebrity teams and things like that. Tell me about those.
So BAFTA LA actually sort of punches way above its weight in Hollywood, which is great. Hollywood loves the Brits, you know. I mean, gone are the days where they used to pay the Brits more. British actors, you know, for those that don't know, British actors used to be paid more than American actors because they thought we were simply better. It's fascinating. But they love the Brits. There's a bit of believing everything that we say just because we tend to say it in an accent they rather like. That was a bit scary. Yeah. Learning when I got there that people were hanging off my every word actually was quite discombobulating because I was thinking, listen, most of what I say is complete rubbish. Really, don't take this too seriously. Anyway, it was what it was, and you know, it was an extraordinary thing that I couldn't really say no to. I had to do it, and I had to go, and the parties were just an extension of things that I'd sort of really done before. You know, I'd been in events, but clearly I hadn't run big Hollywood events before. And that was fantastic. So the BAFTA LA is mostly known for two fabulous tea parties, very sort of formal-ish British afternoon tea parties. One that is the day before the Emmys, and one is the day before the Golden Globes. And it's also then mostly known for the Britannia Awards. So it has its own international BAFTAs, which are called the Britannias. And they're six big international awards that are given out every year at the end of October. To the great and the good of directing, acting talent from around the world. And it's a monster event. It's, you know, 1,000 people at the Beverly Hilton. It's televised live. Jack Whitehall fronted it for 3 years for me, which was absolutely fantastic. That was how Jack got his first American agent, because we had Meryl Streep on the show that year. Meryl was sitting next to her agent, who runs CAA, one of the world's biggest agencies, who saw Jack do his opening monologue and his routine. Jack had never really been in the US at all at that stage. He wasn't known outside the UK other than as a stand-up comic. And when he arrived the following morning after the Britannias, the head of CAA said to all his agents, I saw this guy last night called Jack Whitehall at the Britannias. Somebody needs to sign him by the end of the day. So that was terrific. It was great for me because I introduced new talent to America, and it was obviously terrific for Jack too. So the Britannia Awards has been wonderful. You know, we've had fantastic people who honour BAFTA by accepting the award, which is great. And I sort of went out on a high. I left BAFTA 4 days after the last one in October last year with Jane Fonda, not quite doing what I expected, but accepting her award, which is the Stanley Kubrick Award, which is the most important award of all, and accepting her award in a non-traditional manner. So we had been told a couple of weeks before that she wasn't going to turn up. And for us, that's a nightmare. You know, we'd sold tickets, we'd advertised it, the broadcasters knew she was part of the show, and then suddenly you've got somebody who's not coming, and that's really devastating. And I thought, hang on a second, we're going to have to try and finagle this so that we get something out of it. So the reason that she wasn't coming was that she had decided to take 3 months out of her life to go to Washington, D.C. to campaign for climate change. And she was doing something called Fire Drill Fridays, where she would stand up, make speeches outside the Capitol building for an hour, and then she would walk onto First Avenue. Is it First Street or First Avenue? I can't remember, which is illegal if you do anything other than walk across it. The minute that you stand, you are deemed by the local police to be, it's an offence. You cannot gather, you cannot protest in the road. So the week before, she had started this thing of standing in the road and getting arrested. And I thought, okay, well, I can see why you're not coming, because clearly, if you're going to be arrested in Washington, D.C., I can't get you on a plane fast enough to get you back to LA.
We go to our live feed in prison where our recipients will make their speech. Yeah.
Well, what we did was actually, it was I sort of worked it to the best advantage. So I approached her team and I said, look, I think I can make it work for her if she can make it work for me. I'll get more publicity for her campaign as long as she can do what I need her to do. So I negotiated with them. I flew down to Washington overnight. I briefed her first thing in the morning. We mic'd her up. We took her to the Capitol building. She did her 1 hour thing. I then had a cameraman that I used her cameraman who was making a documentary about her. We put a big yellow sticky mark on the camera so that, because there were 30 camera crews there, so that she could see which her camera was, because I had briefed her for what I needed her to deliver for me.
Brilliant.
And so what then happened was on the night in Hollywood where she didn't turn up, Jack Whitehall said, in fact, it wasn't Jack. Last year it was somebody else. He said, oh, she can't be here. And we cut away to an empty chair and there was a big groan in the room when people realized that Jane Fonda wasn't going to walk up onto the stage. And then we played a video, part of which we'd shot the evening before I arrived, explaining why she was campaigning. And then we cut to her sort of walking arm in arm down the street with her supporters. And then we saw little bits of her speech. And then we saw her stand in the road, and then the police swoop, about 30 or 40 police swoop to the protesters, carrying handcuffs. And they went up to her and they handcuffed her. And then there was about a 20-minute hiatus, in fact, probably more, half an hour, 40 minutes, whilst they arrested everybody. They arrested all the women first, then they arrested the men. And as they were putting the shackles on her, and turning her towards the van that they were loading her into, she put her hands up in the air and she said, BAFTA, thank you, BAFTA. Thank you for the Stanley Kubrick BAFTA award. I'm sorry I'm not with you tonight. In handcuffs. And in the Beverly Hilton that night, they went bonkers, absolutely bonkers. It's never been done before, of somebody accepting a major international award in handcuffs as they are led away to get into the back of the police van. So, and I was sitting there at my table with tears streaming down my cheeks, sort of laughing and crying at the same time because I'd managed to pull it off. So it was a nice high to leave Hollywood on after 5 years.
So yeah. You made the decision to leave. You wanted to come back.
Yeah, well, my original contract was only for 2 years, and then they offered me another contract, and there was another negotiation with the kids, and they were going, "Oh, Mum, you're having fun, why not?" And by that stage, I was coming home a lot more often. And then after I'd done a total of 3.5 years, I gave them a year's notice, and I said, "Look, I really need to go home." And I wanted to be back in time for my youngest son doing his finals at university. And I wanted to get on with another bit of my career. So, in fact, I gave them initially 6 months notice, and then I stayed for another 7 months after that. Yeah. I was back here in November. Last year.
Fantastic. To a warm fanfare, we've got you back in whilst you're in the States, though, we mentioned Donald Trump beforehand, who was famously a guest on Through the Keyhole those years ago. Did you ever have a chance to catch up with him whilst you're in the States?
No, I wasn't hanging out with Donald Trump. And I think, you know, once he took up his political mantle, I think probably any warmth that I had felt for him dissipated somewhat. So, no, didn't meet him, didn't come across him, didn't invite him to the BAFTA Awards or the Britannia Awards. And he's clearly doing his thing in Hollywood. I mean, in America. I mean, he's not a fan of Hollywood, really. I don't, you know, that Hollywood and California is mainly made up of people with Democratic sympathies. So I don't think he's a great fan of Hollywood. We know when he's in town, and you know, my old office was up on the 12th floor, and we always knew when the helicopters came over. There was a certain group of helicopters, and once they came over town, we knew he was there. But often he would come into town. It wasn't announced, and then he would go again.
Was he a good guest on Through the Keyhole all those years ago?
Yeah, I think he was. I think he was slightly mystified. I don't think his team had briefed him very well as to what Through the Keyhole was. So I took David Frost with me to New York because Donald Trump wouldn't come, strangely, to Leeds, where we used to record Through the Keyhole.
What's it like to be down the pits?
Exactly. So David Frost came out to New York, and we filmed the acceptance, the sort of interview bit, with David and Donald Trump in his office in New York, in Trump Tower. And when David handed over the famous gold Through the Keyhole key, that Trump looked at David rather quizzically, as though to say, "I thought this was Frost on Sunday on BBC. I thought
my next interview. He doesn't want that."
Exactly. I don't think he really understood that he was on a game show. So when we wrapped, I just said to everybody, "Run for the airport. Just make sure we've got the stuff. Run for the airport before he realizes he's been on a game show."
Superb. So you came back at the end of last year, and what have you been up to back in the fold? You've got the Rolodex, or the equivalent of a Rolodex. Now everybody loves you over here. What are you up to?
Oh, bless you. Well, I decided I didn't want another big full-time job. I've sat behind a desk too long, and I wanted to sort of get back to doing things at a more granular level, and I wanted to get closer to production because I've been away from production for a long, long time. So I'm just dividing my time between doing some non-profit work, because obviously, you know, I now sort of know how to run a charity and I know how to fundraise. So I'm doing some non-profit work, which I'm very happy about. I'm helping out in an advisory capacity with the Big Issue. I'm working on Help for Heroes. I'm doing some local work at the moment for a charity in Fulham called TLC, which just came into operation during the pandemic. And I'm going out and delivering food to, you know, food bank food, which is great. And then on the other side, I'm working on 3 or 4 projects that are sort of fee-paying projects, which are terrific. I've become a non-executive director of a company in Dubai, which I'm happy about. I'm working on a children's animation series, which has just been picked up for international television, which is tremendous. And I'm doing some advisory work on somebody who wants to put money into social impact entertainment, which is basically rather like participant media. They tend to fund films that have a cause or a message, rather like Spotlight or Argo. And this person I'm advising in London is hoping to do something rather similar to fund great stories that help make the world a better place by somebody shining a light on them.
And I think it's what we touched on earlier, those altruistic moments where you can understand. And I know there was a tragic moment 10 plus years ago when I think in the space of a very short period of time, you lost a lot of people very close to you. They all died within a matter of weeks of each other. And I think there was that realization then, wasn't it? Trying to organize things and how people are so devastated and don't have a chance to say goodbye to this one. And there's all those sort of emotions that drove you to set up effectively something that could help others in that situation.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I had one bad year actually where I lost, I think, my mother, my brother, my uncle, my aunt, my cousin, and both next door neighbours. So my black dress was constantly at the dry cleaners. It was a bit of a crazy year, and I set up something called Lasting Post, which was really an advisory website of giving people information about the end of one's life, what to prepare for, or what the family should prepare for, or what happens afterwards, or what the family should do afterwards, or where you left messages for your loved ones, advice that you could get about funerals or eulogies or speeches or hymns or whatever it may be. And that actually was a website that ran for about a dozen years. And I was very pleased that it was there as a sort of aggregator of information for people who were going through bereavement or coming towards the end of their life. I say that grief is a thief. I think an awful lot of mental wellness is affected by bereavement. And I think a lot of people don't tag it back to bereavement. They understand that they're sad and they don't quite understand why. And I think bereavement, unless it's handled well, can stay with you forever and can really damage a person's mental well-being. So actually now I do a small radio piece on Men's Radio Station once a week, which is specifically aimed at mental well-being. And I talk about film and television and what to watch to cheer yourself up. But that idea of sort of giving something back to help people just cope with their lives a bit better is something that I feel quite passionate about.
Absolutely. And you're right, I think, and it's timely because now people don't really have a chance to say goodbye. There's been this period with lockdown where you've had tragic loss of life, and the people close to them haven't been able to attend the funeral. And they've now set up this, announced today, I think, about the website where you can put your messages and so on and so forth. And having those sort of practical, because a lot of people live with regrets. They regret that they never had a chance to say goodbye, or they didn't really have a chance to say, I love you, or to tell you how you really feel. And I think what this extraordinary time has done is to drive people to think about those sort of key elements. Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, the funeral I mentioned earlier on that I went to yesterday was actually webcast. So that the brother of the cousin who died was able to be there from Canada. And the nieces and nephews could watch it from Canada, as well as other friends in London who just wanted to pay their respects. They clearly wanted to be there in person, but weren't able to. But the webcast, I think, helped. And I got feedback afterwards from the people who'd watched it to say that it had helped in a moment of sadness.
I think there's a lot of lessons to be learnt there, effectively, when we're looking at that. And I've had a lot of people on this programme who come and say, look, it's Mental Health Awareness Week, but actually you should be aware of mental health all the time. Because if you break a leg, everybody's happy, they sign the cast and things like that. Well done, you broke your leg, how did you do it? Talk about mental illness. There used to be a terrible stigma about it. And what you find is, I mean, a lot of the comics that you mentioned, some of the great comedians had massive demons that they're talking about. People like Tony Hancock, you had obviously Stephen Fry's very public. And now it's okay. It's okay not to be okay. And I think when people like Royals are talking about it as well, it's permission for people to share. I think people take comfort from that. So your website, ahead of its time, like most of the things in your career, but giving people a focus, say, look, I can't deal with all these things. There's one place to go where you can get that information. It's really powerful. Yeah.
I mean, I think the person who really started that was Princess Diana. I think her sons have taken it to another level, but she was the first person who was very honest in terms of opening up and going, mental wellness is a thing. And now the royal family, Charles and his sons talk about it frequently. And I think that's tremendous.
Absolutely, and long may it continue. And I know MRS, very well, Men's Radio Station, fantastic, and it's good what they're doing. We did something similar called Canned Laughter, which was just encouraging people, because canned laughter is that sort of artificial thing, and actually you hide the real feelings inside. People are not alone when they're talking about isolation, and especially these difficult times. Having comfort about hearing other people's stories is really, really powerful. We've had all sorts of people on the show talking about that. In a career that has spanned so many different aspects of the industry, two final points. What has been your biggest regret? What's been the biggest regret?
I always wanted to film Through the Keyhole at number 10, and they wouldn't let me in.
It's still possible. There's a little baby, a new production at number 10.
That would have been fantastic. I'd still like to get Through the Keyhole on air in the United States, so that's a work in progress.
The return of Donald.
He won't be hosting it, I can tell you that much. I think probably this ties to the mental wellness thing, is not having as much confidence along the way as would have been helpful. I think confidence held me back a lot. And I think if I'd got over that earlier, that I might have had a very different career, or it might have been, I don't know, it might have been different. It's back to the imposter syndrome. I've suffered from the imposter syndrome all my life. I never quite think that I'm in the job that I should be in, because I never think I'm that good. So there we are. I suppose it's a regret. If I were more confident, I'd probably be a completely different person.
You control the world if you're more confident. This will be extraordinary. And what has been your proudest moment then? Your proudest moment in such a glorious career?
Oh gosh, the Jane Fonda thing was very good fun.
I love it. I love that story. I hadn't heard it before. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, look it up. It's there online. It's a great piece of footage. It was wonderful to be there. It was wonderful to meet her. She was an absolute heroine of mine. I loved her. I'd loved her ballsiness, and I just thought she was a great human being. And she did not disappoint. I mean, that was wonderful. Some people in Hollywood disappoint. She definitely didn't. So I think I'm really proud of that. And I think I'm really proud of actually having been part of the Through the Keyhole family for now 33 years.
Wow.
It's been my longest television love affair, really. And I still love it, and I love the people, and we're all still friends, and it's great. It's been a family to me. And I've loved every minute of that ride, to be honest.
Oh,
so yeah, I suppose I'm very proud that I'm still part of that, and but yeah, they still want me to be part of it, so that's good.
Fantastic. And finally, Chantal Rickards, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I think the instant reaction would be is if anybody said, "How do you remember Shonny?" that I would like them to smile. I would like them just to remember me with a smile on their face, whatever the smile is for, that hopefully I just added a little bit to the fun of life, and to the sense of humor, and the just enjoying oneself as you go through your life. And hopefully I've done that, and that some of that's rubbed off on other people.
Shonny, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to catch up.
Not at all. Really nice talking to you, and continued good luck over the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There you go. Thank you very much indeed for my guest, Chantal Rickards. Lovely to welcome her back to the UK. If you'd like to take part in the programme or have any comments, write to me at lol@optimustv.com. I've been Andrew Eborn. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Take care.